Noon awaits me. A high cliff on the seaside stretches empty up to the horizon. On the salt marsh, marked here and there with the distorted bushes, a dark line of the forest is visible in the distance. Complete wilderness. Good. If I met anyone here, I would have to kill them. Not a joke, that. The mission is strictly classified, officially illegal even. The planet is subject to strict quarantine. Since the fiasco of the scientific program, the absolute quarantine. First anthropomorphic civilization discovered in the known universe. Invaluable. They cannot find out that they are not alone. We cannot meddle with their culture, whatever they would do. Who are we to judge them, etc.? All that I do here, my mere existence, goes against all regulations solemnly proclaimed. In Brussels, Glacier is, in the eyes of non-ingerence ideology, a war criminal. He risks the culture shock just to save several people. And maybe he even wants to know what is going on here. Completely against the directives. I am fine with that. I land within the accuracy of 1 meter. Some 50 meters from the edge of the cliff. A wing-type parachute and gravitational maneuvering engines. I wait 5 minutes until the external covers go sufficiently cold to make getting out possible. Then I release the locks and unfasten the belts. The capsule, standing in the circle of burned glass, looks like a cracked fruit. I have little time. I cannot enjoy the views. As soon as possible, all traces of my arrival have to disappear. I need to extract all the equipment that I need to take with me, roll the parachute and put it into the capsule, and then get packed and launch the countdown. I have to move away at least half a kilometer. That's the distance I have from the limestone rocks bordering the forest. That's lucky. They should give a moderate cover from the blast. I move the things in tranches. Pack bags, saddle, sack, weapons. The air is clean and cold, exposed to the eerie, sharp light of the sunset. It's the only alien planet that I've seen in my life. As almost all people, I have never left Earth before. So I cannot comprehend that somehow everything around seems, in a way, ordinary, familiar. Grass is grass. Plants are plants. Sure, they're different from those I'm accustomed to, but no more in, let's say, Brazil or Australia. Sky above the head, sunset, sea waves, they all look normal, just like the Costa Verde base, just like home in Split, like everywhere. I feel bad about the parachute, those several square meters of foil, stronger and lighter than any fabric available here. Those lots of wonderful ropes braided from arachnids, each of which could hold the weight of an ox. Everything is to evaporate within a blink of an eye, while the months of survival training permeated me with the collector instinct. Each item you find may be useful. That is why it's hard for me to part ways with a parachute. I'm wasting it, and perhaps quite soon I will be struggling with some useless fiber. I unbox the detonator cover, turn the key, enter the 6-digit code, unveil the red handle, turn it, and pull it out for the full length. Nothing. Instead of the countdown, digits, the display shows the line of machine codes, some signs and error messages. Now I am getting hot. This is one of this world's mysteries. One of those I'm expected to explain. Midgard is the death zone for electronics. Here in a short time, all the gadgets we're surrounded with, at home from the birth, up to the dignified death, go crazy at first, and in the end die out. First expedition did not even manage to take off. Evacuation shuttle that was sent to them reached only the orbit. Then all the devices went black, even the light inside. The shuttle went adrift. They had to tow it away. Everyone survived, but had to toss out even the watches. The shuttle which arrived for the last expedition waited in the arranged spot for only half an hour. When it came back, it almost crashed against the wall of the mothership. Now I have no idea whether the countdown started, and only the display died, or if the self-destruction sequence failed completely. If I'm wrong, I'll keep fighting with the device, while the hyperthermobaric charge goes off right under my legs. End of the mission. I feel my linen shirt getting wet. I nervously hit the dead buttons of the keypad, entering the cancellation code, then resetting the device with the key. It slowly reboots, then again key code handle. Now the countdown starts, even if some digits on the screen look weirdly, like the letters of an unknown alphabet. I assume the detonator is working, and I start sprinting towards the rocks. The explosion reaches me after 200 meters, at best. I notice only a blinding flash, and I fail to even fall down. The shock wave sweeps me like a tsunami and drags through the swamp. My mouth is full of swamp water. One hand and back are burning, as if poured with boiling water. In half a second, the wave is back. The air is filling back the vacuum in the epicenter. Conclusion is obvious. The detonator launched the first time. That was close. The place where my capsule stood is now only the semicircular crater, as if eaten out from the cliff, and the ring of carbonized grass around. Over that, a column of smoke hovers, like a miniature atomic bomb mushroom. And he ordered all the ships burned down on the shore. Beyond the ring of rocks, beyond which I left the equipment, I sit on the flat stone and lean against the granite. I look at the darkening sky. I listen to the alien, sorrowful bird songs. In our world, it's hard to find the true wilderness, in which there would be no one aside from nature, the sky above and the man sitting on the rock. The man bound by only that law which carries in their heart. Throughout all of my life, wherever I went, I was controlled by millions of regulations. Thousands of clerks normalized my every thought and every deed. There was a procedure for everything. All the time they tried to watch over me and protect me from any risk. All of my life, I felt as if I was 12, and as if I had 1,000,000 parents. Here, no one is watching over me. I can get drunk, twist my ankle, blow myself up, or fall into the well. Everything at my own risk. God, what a relief. Under the cover of sacks, I find the flat plastic bottle of Palinka Monastery and take a large sip. But first I spill a few drops on the inside of the palm and push it flat against the ground. The sacrifice for Hind, warrior, God. Now, the coast of sails is my only homeland. I feel the taste of plums, grown somewhere on the other side of the space, somewhere under Rijeka. The taste of the Adriatic sun, which here is just barely visible bleak star within the unimportant constellation known as a palm. Inconceivably far away, mind-shattering distance. Humans cannot think in the astronomical categories. I've been warned, it's fatal for self-esteem. One can go mad. As if anyone who volunteers to something like that could be normal anyway. I reorder my possessions. Every item I know by heart, I have had it in my hands 1,000 times. I can assemble and disassemble it while asleep. At the beginning I did not understand what I needed this for. I thought I would be better off with a regular weapon, at least a gun. I can look like a native, sure, but what's the point of employing a bunch of xenoethnologists to sew me shoes from the specially modified leathers with cloned tendons, if I can just wear solid army or tourist shoes for 50 euros? Who's going to care? I will make it into legends as the one with the magical shoes and change the culture of this word. Really? Why cannot I take pants? I'm wearing a specially knotted linen scarf instead. It's not that difficult to do. You take the scarf, tie it like a belt, then take one of the rectangular ends hanging out from the back. Turn it in the middle so that 2 triangles form and pass through your legs and through the belt part in the front. Very simple and very inconvenient. My cargo could have burdened a large horse, but I need as much as I can. They taught me how to manage without equipment, but I don't know how long I would stay here. Every single item can increase my chance of survival. I will be recognized as missing in action if they won't find me again in the same spot after a year, or if I don't send a confirmation message instead. Electronics die quickly, but for some reason bionic systems continue functioning. Not that strange. After all, animals and people survive here just fine. I take out the radiolaria container. My mascot, my pet, my transponder. A metal cylinder covered with entangled ornaments. I touch some of them in the arranged order: snakehead, maple leaf, wheel, frog eye. The inner tank smoothly slides out with a hiss. Radiolaria floats in the greenish gel like a giant medusa. Her tentacles hang freely. The hats of her antennae keep covering her bell, the glassy body only briefly traversed by tiny points of luminescence. The transponder is dormant and awaits its time. Once I would need to call support, report the mission success, or send the final report, and then Radiolaria will wake up, send my message to the observer satellite, probably at the cost of her life. During the training, it turned out that to march, I have to put on my full armor, otherwise I won't be able to carry everything around. It's not that heavy, just terribly unwieldy. It fills out a huge sack, and I need to carry a saddle, saddlebags, rolled coat, weapons, and shield. If that was a regular native armor, I would be barely able to move at all. Thanks to the superior materials made to closely resemble steel forged here, thongs, and hardened leather, the armor I wear weighs only about 12 kilos. Full gear of a local warrior, twice that weight. So I put on the greaves, bracers, chainmail, lamellar breastplate, and helmet. I fasten my belt with weapons, and, for the first time here, I draw my sword. It was produced in the Nordland Concern factories, specialized in gravitational assault helicopters. It does not resemble the regular swords of the people of Coast. It's slightly longer. Its handle is 2 times longer without a visible pommel, a square guard and single-edged blade, bred as a monomolecular particle. Its shape was designed slightly upon the shinobi ken, the blade of the Japanese assassins. Truth be told, I preferred the samurai katana, but my fencing instructor quickly and painfully proved to me that it's just a stupid whim of mine. Instead, I got the more universal tool, which can be used to fight in several different styles, using the shield, one or two-handed. By fencing, fighting in the style of kenjutsu, or cleaving like a Templar. I also got a machete as a simple tool, is simply built as a sword and as technologically advanced. But in pseudo-feudal cultures, like the one here, a sword is usually not a mere piece of metal. Not only is it worth a lot, but can host a warrior's honor, spirits of its victims, luck, some god himself, and devil knows what else. If I use my sword to cut wood for the fire or dig ground, I risk getting in trouble or becoming a laughingstock. At best, I draw unwanted attention. There's also a knife, some camping equipment, warm clothing, spare shoes, winter shoes, disassembled bow, some arrows, a round shield from a laminate, and a saddle. A damned saddle. It's comfortable and light, has a lot of pockets and hidden compartments. But I doubt anything more unwieldy exists to transport on the back. Helm goes obviously on the head. Saddlebags are constructed so that I can hang them over my shoulders, one in front and the other in the bag, and gird them together, resulting in the awkward backpack. A shield can be worn over the back. A sack with the bow parts on the belt at the right side. Machete under the cover of the bag on the front. Finally, I get the saddle loaded on the back of my neck, in a way that its inner pad leans against the shield, and one of the tabs goes between the back of the head and the bag on the back. Here I am, arriving, laden like a dromedary in full armor, with a saddle on the neck, looking like a Tweedledum and Tweedledee in one person. I stumble in the muddy marsh full of rocks and branches, aiming for the forest which would mercifully hide this freak. A kingdom for a horse. Dusk falls. I decide to wake up Sifril. Sifril, my parasitic guardian angel, bred in the secret lab of Nishima Biotronics for the purposes of the Marine Unit of Special Reconnaissance. The only part of my equipment I am sure not to lose, and the only one without which it would be truly hard to survive. It makes me superhuman. Thanks to him, I see, in the dark. I hear the squeak of a mouse from 200 meters. In the moments of danger, he pumps hyperadrenaline into my veins, which would speed up my movements and reactions. Thanks to him, the metallic noises of the people of coast or the guttural babble of Amitrages sound in my ears like my own speech. If needed, it will anesthetize me, heal me, display the map on the inside of my eyelids, or the red dot targeting right on my retina. Only thanks to him during the year of training I've learnt so much. I'd need at least 12 years to study otherwise. Without this damned parasitic fungus inside my brain, all this mission would be nothing but a costly suicide. They introduced it through my nose. At that time, it was still a grain. It dissolved the mucous membrane and turned into a larva no larger than a malaria parasite. Then it traveled through my bloodstream, releasing white blood cells into the field until it reached the hypothalamus. There it nested and began to grow, feeding on my blood. 12 years ago, in deep secrecy, when the first model was applied, my beloved homeland, through the mouth of some deranged bureaucrat, insisted that Sifril ensure the soldiers' compliance with regulations, procedures, and relevant laws, and preferably that he be obedient. I suspect they imagined a Europe where something like this would be loaded into every newborn. Those lucky ones were from the Fallschirmjäger unit. Several commandos had already died during the testing phase, and 2 shot themselves in the head before their implants could be deactivated. 3 ended up in the loony bin. I was scared as hell when they introduced it to me. They explained that it was the 6th thoroughly tested version, that it was just an assistive system, a booster that wouldn't interfere with my personality, that it was simply an internal computer. It would temporarily provide me access to unused areas of the brain and allow me to control processes we normally have no influence over. They assured me that it was entirely reversible. If they deactivated it, it would simply die and be absorbed by the body. They claimed they knew what they were doing. I didn't believe them one bit. I was damn scared. And then Cifrol activated itself and took away my fear. That was the first thing it did. It killed in me the ability to experience ordinary human fear, to panic or hysteria. I would no longer have a genuine human neurosis, and I wouldn't wake up with a stomach full of anxiety and a sense of undefined misfortune like a normal person. Faced with danger, I'd strategize, think, and plan to the end. I might be concerned or scared, but I couldn't feel paralyzing terror. I just couldn't. When nothing particular was happening, I'd be mindlessly cheerful. I wouldn't fret in advance. I thought it turned me into a psychopath, and I immediately went to the glacier about it. They examined me. Cifrol had simply installed filters on me. I could love, like sympathize. I could feel sadness. I could get scared. The higher emotions remained, but negative emotions couldn't grow in me to the point of overwhelming me. The glacier warned that this could be deadly, that in that case, I would need to have twice as much common sense as others, because those mechanisms, fear and panic, were natural self-preservation safeguards. But I felt like I had too little common sense for a while now anyway. Best proof? I had agreed to take part in the mission. There are downsides too. Sometimes the acceleration of reactions isn't all that convenient. When hyperadrenaline fills your blood, you can punch through doors you want to open and break your bones. Sounds are lowered by several octaves and become unintelligible. Heavens forbid you clap your hands in such a state. You could cut your fingers grabbing a string. All of us who trained at Darkmoor Castle after Cifrol activation were afraid to touch women. After all, those also can be emotions. We exchanged legends about how supposedly some commando completely crushed his girl in a surge of passion. Besides, there were girls in our group as well, 2 of them. Legends also mentioned what happens when 2 people with enhancers hook up, like me and Deirdre. Fortunately, they were just legends. When Cifrol blessed me with the gift of languages, I went on leave to a pub in Axonhill and found myself unable to order a beer. I babbled a mixture of coastal and Kabirian speech, sprinkling in Croatian, Finnish, and Polish curses. Eventually it all adjusted itself somehow. Also, night vision seems convenient until you enter darkness and encounter a source of light. The pupil reacts instantly, and so does Cifrol, but the afterimage on the retina lingers for a few minutes. Deirdre once went to the fridge at night, illuminating her way with her eyes, and opened it. She fully regained her sight only after breakfast. On the flip side, the awareness that you can catch a flying arrow or hit a wasp on a tree stump if needed helps a lot. It allows you to survive. My job is to gather information. My primary weapon is my brain. That's what I was taught. But physical superiority brings a completely different mental attitude. The sun is setting. I plow through the swamp, stepping close to dried out stumps, leaping over rocks and stones, balancing a pyramid of cargo on my back. My shirt beneath the armor, chainmail, and coat is soaked with sweat. My back, burned from explosions, stings unbearably. The dark, tangled forest, a genuine wall of mossy branches, is only a few meters away. I stand on the yielding carpet of moss, glance once more at the sea horizon just over the cliff's edge, and activate the Sefrel.
The sun started setting when Vuko Drakkainen entered among the trees. The forest was unpleasant, low, tangled, filled with stunted trees with twisted branches covered in bearded lichens. Somewhere in the branches, birds chirped. Drakkainen marched with an even, rhythmic pace, holding the hilt of his sword in one hand and stabilizing the saddle strapped to his back with the other, which hooked onto branches. There were no paths in this forest. The trees that died of old age fell onto the forest floor, blocking the way or catching on the crowns of neighboring trees, hanging on tangled branches, and then becoming covered in fungi and lichens until they rotted away. It was like a jungle. After an hour, he measured his marching speed and concluded that at this rate, it would take him at least another 2 hours to reach the research station 8 kilometers away. Of course, there was a possibility that upon arrival, he would be greeted with tea and a local game sandwich. "We've learned how to make local bread. We thought nobody would come after us." This way, the mission would be completed in 2 days, not counting the time spent on planning, training, and preparations. The road stretched on and on. The forest was monotonous and dull, the same twisted black branches and careless festoons of lichens swaying in the wind. It smelled of damp fungi, decay, and the sharp, musky scent of small rodents. He looked at the world in the infrared, out of boredom mostly, but partly because the underbrush was beginning to sink into darkness. The trees painted in green didn't become prettier, but he could spot small, capybara-like rodents sitting in the undergrowth, their eyes glowing silver in the dark, birds leaping in the branches, insects zipping through the air like tracer rounds, and snakes lurking among the bushes. Eventually, his march lasted almost 3 hours, and when he reached his destination, night had already fallen. The landscape around Wanderer hadn't changed. It simply came to a halt at some point, and he said to himself, "Here." He knew he was just a few dozen meters from the clearing on top of the hill, where a wooden cabin with a shingled roof had been erected, surrounded by a palisade, proudly named Midgard II Field Research Station. Drakkainen removed the cumbersome gear from himself and quietly placed it between 2 decaying tree stumps, concealing it with feathery fern-like leaves. Silence hung in the air. The birds had already gone silent, and occasionally, one could only hear the distant hum of a nocturnal predator. Sitting amidst the ferns, he waited for his soaked canvas shirt to dry and listened intently. The wind carried no familiar sounds. From this distance, he should have been able to hear the crackling of a fire, the clinking of metal utensils, or conversations. But no one was speaking. The dead silence was only interrupted by a faint, mysterious sound. Something tinkled and rattled softly, barely audible. However, the stench of decay was unmistakable, sharp and nauseating, impossible to mistake for anything else. For a moment he shook his head, inhaling the air until he pinpointed the right direction. The smell was coming directly from the research station. Not as strong as it would be if it had been the smell of human corpses, especially as much as 8 bodies. But still, maybe it's just some abandoned supplies, he thought. He removed his helmet and shield, put his sword over his back, and checked if it was securely fastened to its hilt. Then he tightened all the buckles and jumped a few times on the moss, making sure nothing jingled. He tied a scarf around his head and found a puddle under the roots, smearing mud on his forehead and cheeks. The station stood on a hill overgrown with sparsely scattered shrubs. He didn't see any movement. He only saw the jagged, not very tall palisade, resembling a suit of rotten teeth, and a collapsed roof in the center. There was no smoke, no fire, no sign of any movement. The station looked abandoned, and for a long time. Yet he felt uneasy. Firstly, on the entire hillside, within several meters of the palisade, dead animals lay. They formed a circle around the entire station. Rats, boars, deer, wolves, even birds, in various stages of decay. He saw bones, feathers, shreds of meat, and fur. Most of the animals were either cut or torn apart. None were properly skinned or gutted, but all of them had their heads removed. Furthermore, it was about 5 degrees colder on the hill than anywhere else. A patch of cold and winding tendrils of mist emanated from the epicenter in the middle of the station, visible as a bluish glow. He crept forward, silently slipping from bush to nook, from nook to rock, like a hunting cat. The mangled remains were scattered everywhere, some emitting a greenish, phosphorescent glow from the warmth generated by the decaying processes. He decided to filter out the stench of carcasses because he couldn't smell any other scents anymore. The closer he got to the station, the colder it became. He could see little puffs of vapor escaping his mouth. The gate, haphazardly assembled from warped, splintered planks, had been broken long ago. However, it appeared to have been broken from the inside. He pressed his back against the palisade and moved closer to the gate, gently gripping the sword handle wrapped with a strap. Normally, a massive beam secured the gate, but it had now decayed beyond use. It had been broken by a powerful impact, as if someone had rammed the gate with a vehicle. However, the scientist didn't have access to any vehicles. He leaned under the broken boards and quickly peeked into the courtyard. Emptiness, chaos, ruin. Inside the palisade, a house had been erected, now empty, partially demolished, and dark. In the center stood a square well with a crane, a few smaller buildings against the wall of the stockade. All of this had already turned into piles of beams and stones. Somewhere, water was dripping, and from somewhere came a faint clinking sound reminiscent of wooden chimes. Apart from that, silence and emptiness prevailed here. Drakkainen slipped inside like a cat, treading cautiously on the path made of wet, decaying planks. The chimes sounded again, and only then did he see them. They hung on the rafters of the house, on the branches of the tree growing in the middle of the courtyard, on sharpened posts of the stockade. Wind chimes, small constructions woven from thin leather straps and grass swaying with the wind. And bones, shin bones, rib bones, skulls of smaller animals. They hung on straps adorned with clusters of feathers, swaying in the gusts of wind, colliding with each other, emitting that quiet, persistent sound he had been hearing for a while now, taps of various tones forming random melodies, a sound that might have been pleasant to the ear if it weren't for its eerie source. He slipped into the cabin. It smelled of old wood, long depleted chemicals, and mold. The long interior was divided into several rooms. He dilated his pupils and enhanced his perception of light even further, allowing him to see the interior gray as dawn. Without Cifril, it would have been as dark as a well in there. Wooden bunks along the walls, a long table made of logs in the center, a hearth. And at that table, someone was seated. They sat motionless like a statue, leaning forward, elbows on the tabletop, as if contemplating their evening tea. Their skin was smooth and unnaturally gray, slightly shimmering in the starlight filtering through the leaky roof. Drakkainen didn't speak. He simply circled around the table and saw the person sitting on the other side. A skull stripped of flesh, a ring of bared teeth, rib bones, and the bones of the other arm. A corpse, more precisely, a half-corpse, half-statue. It seemed that someone had embedded their right side in something like concrete and then placed them at the table. Vuko reached out and lightly touched the other person's hand. It was cold and hard, uniformly gray, with a fine layer of tiny crystals. Granite. A polished and precisely sculpted statue of a man's right side. The left side had decayed, leaving only a skeleton with dried remnants of skin and muscles. A piece of scalp with long, pale hair still clinging to the skull. He crouched to the side and carefully examined the point where the sculpture ended and the body began. Where bones were visible, they seamlessly merged with the stone as if they had melted together. Was this really a sculpture? Who did something like this? How? And why? On the table in front of the man, he saw traces of blood. Brown, dark smudges that had soaked into the wood a long time ago. He rubbed them with his finger, brought it to his nose, and inhaled deeply. Then, overcoming his disgust, he plucked a hair from the other person's skull and also ran it under his nose. Dr. Johann Hallering from the University of Munich, half turned into a sculpture. Lord, have mercy on his soul! He searched for a laboratory in the hope of finding some notes, but the entire interior of the cottage was completely demolished. The center had suffered the most. It looked as if something had exploded here, breaking the structure of the roof, causing the beams to collapse onto the floor. He found some dishes, a crate with the remnants of military rations in packets, some tattered bits of clothing, a woman's lipstick, a crushed mirror. They couldn't use computers here, no discs, dictaphones. They had to record everything on paper. So there must have been research protocols, notebooks, notes. But he couldn't find anything like that. What had happened here? A raid by the natives? The station's rooms appeared intentionally vandalized, but not looted. Drakkainen was prepared to think in terms of the people of the coast, at least as much as possible. However, he knew for sure that in their place he wouldn't spare a perfectly good steel axe lying on the ground. He would have taken the dishes, the canisters, the mirror from the primitive bathroom, and a lot of other things, even a woman's cosmetic bag, in which a handful of jewelry gleamed peacefully. He would have taken everything he could and only afterwards sort through it, discarding what was worthless. The laboratory consisted, among other things, of a long, sturdy table illuminated by field lamps, fueled with liquid fuel. It was covered with a collection of various local items. They were neatly arranged. Buttons, buckles, clasps. Everything used for decorating and fastening clothing was grouped together. Jewelry, too, both women's and men's. Necklaces, amulets, bracelets, earrings, stones, silver, a bit of gold, a box full of coins, also a mix. Silver coins, crude coastal crowns, a beaten imperial coin from Amitraja, square Kiberian tigrics. Plenty of them, all good haul for a potential native. The only notes he came across were a file of technical drawings on tracing paper depicting patterns and embellishments for clothing. Apart from that, there was nothing. No notebooks, protocols, nothing. Someone had once sat here. On a folding chair under the warm light of a spirit lamp, they had sorted samples of objects. They had drunk something from a metal cup, bought once in a sports shop, now dulled and covered on the inside with a shrunken, gray mass that was no longer even mold. They had heard something. For example, what had happened to Hallering? Maybe there had been some noise accompanying it. They had stood up abruptly, overturning the small chair. It had folded up and fallen. The parts of the station that hadn't been demolished looked abandoned, frozen in time, like a ship adrift in the Bermuda Triangle. Disheveled bedding on a bed made from stripped branches and a mattress of tightly woven ropes between the beams. He sniffed the sleeping bag, closing his eyes and inhaling deeply. Mold, dust, sawdust, dust from the decaying beams, and deep within, barely detectable, minute traces of DNA. A few skin cells, saliva, traces of semen, leather haze, Nigel, leather haze. Methodically, he circled the living quarters, sniffing the moldy remnants of clothing, old-fashioned straight razor blades, greasy cutlery. He found traces of all 8 of them, but only traces. Outside, there was an empty sound, as if something had rolled along the wooden beams. He grabbed the sword hilt sticking out from his shoulder and carefully slipped out of the hut, moving his back along the beams of the wall. Compared to the twilight inside the hut, the night outside seemed completely bright. Thanks to the enhanced light, he could see almost as clearly as in the gray, overcast dawn. However, where the starlight didn't reach and the scattered glow of the atmosphere wasn't enough, there were deep shadows. Drakkainen concentrated, placing his feet precisely in his soft shoes and maintaining a low combat stance. one hand on the hilt, the other extended forward at shooting point level. Right next to the well, on the path paved with wooden planks, a yellow plastic bucket swayed. The team didn't need to adapt as much to the local conditions as he did. They drank earthly beer from cans, reheated roast beef with vegetables, and drew water with a polyethylene bucket. Something flashed, a shadow on the border of vision, movement too fast for a human being, like a low-flying bird. He assumed that whatever it was, it already knew about his presence. All these bones around the hill had been left here recently. Some of the corpses were quite fresh, and the last trace of the scientist was from 2 years ago. Slowly, cautiously, he circled the house, but nothing moved. At the back of the house, where he hadn't been yet, he came across a statue. This time, a regular one. A smooth sculpture made of stone, probably basalt, undoubtedly local and finely made. It roughly resembled a simplified silhouette of a dancing pregnant woman with triangular teeth like those of a shark. In one hand, something resembling a sickle was stuck in a drilled hole, so it could be removed. In the other hand, the woman held a stone bowl. The statue was about 1.5 meters tall and was probably brought here for research purposes, even though it looked gruesomely heavy. But under its raised dancing foot, there was a pile of skulls, birds, animals of various sizes and species, and 2 human ones. He crouched down cautiously in a position from which he could instantly spring into action and gently cleared away the bones. The first skull he unearthed was small, and the jawbone was missing. It had been thoroughly cleaned by insects, their sharp, acidic traces he could still clearly sense. Sun-faded and rain-washed, it was weathered by the elements. Yet traces of amino acids were still detectable, so he delved deep within himself, trying to pick up the faint scent hidden beneath, reminiscent of singed feathers, traces of nucleotides. He found them and then waited for his brain's converted database components to recognize the individual pattern. For now, he only knew that the DNA smelled familiar. Marzena Zavratilova, a xenozoologist. He touched the statue with his hand. The bowl and the raised thigh had clearly marked the abundant, rust-colored marks and streaks. Something hit him from the side. With a sudden, almost pig-like squeal, it was gray, blue-red, and toothy. Drakkainen was terrified, and suddenly the whole world slowed down. The scream turned into a much lower sound, as if from a dissonant horn. Falling, he saw a disjointed, bony limb with impressive, curved, hook-like claws pass right by his face. The air thickened like water. He grabbed that something around its neck, only then striking with his hip and thigh on the ground. Decayed beams gave way under the weight of his body. He tilted his head to avoid the snapping jaws and, rolling over, kicked his opponent's hip with his sole, then pushed it above his body. A curve throw, executed from a strange position, but ultimately effective. He threw both legs up like a spring, immediately rising from the ground in a combat stance, while simultaneously pulling out the sword with a low sliding sound that reminded him of a tram coming to a halt. The creature was still floating in the air, sideways, clumsily paddling with its limbs. In the dim light of the night, its skin glowed slightly. It was stocky, perhaps 1.5 meters tall, and somehow eerily resembled a frog-like human. It struck the ground on its side, rebounded and slid on its back for 1 meter, but then it stood up with a single, violent movement that, under normal circumstances, would have been an imperceptible blur. Its wide mouth, like a scar in its flat head, growing directly from its shoulders, flashed again with rows of triangular, shark-like teeth. A throbbing pain surged from his arm, and out of the corner of his eye, he saw a dozen narrow, shallow scratches, like those left by a wire brush. It must have had spines on its skin, like a stingray. He raised the sword from the side of his head in a regular haso no kamae. It was just an animal after all. He saw the creature's leg muscles contract, and then it shot towards him, exactly like a gigantic frog. He watched its triangular, elongated feet swinging in the air, its claws stretching out. He endured until the very last moment and evaded the lightning-fast swipe of the creature's rotating limb with a sidestep that followed the spinning ball principle. Then he slashed diagonally, aiming to sever the spine. The blade cut through the dense air. Drakkainen watched in amazement as the creature spun in midair, avoiding the strike, and positioned itself facing him almost simultaneously with his own movement. What a phenomenal reaction speed. It landed on its side, splinters and a touchwood cloud lifted from under its claws, swelling slowly like disturbed mud. The creature immediately tensed its muscles for another leap. He started to inhale as he jumped. In one fluid motion, he stepped off the line of strike and slashed horizontally as fast as he could, knowing well he might strain his tendons. Vibrations from the turbulence flowed through the blade. This time, the blade did get stuck in something for a split second, although he didn't notice what it was because he had reversed his grip with the blade downward and swiped it across as if drawing horizontal 8 in the air. He hit once more, again just barely, with the very tip. He took a step back and changed his grip on the sword once more. The inhale stopped. Now for the exhale. Watching the world in slow motion could make one forget to breathe. A long shape drifted slowly, somersaulting in the air like a discarded object in zero gravity. It resembled a jellyfish. Drakkainen looked again and saw that it was a severed limb, a hand with a piece of the forearm, floating in the air and releasing droplets of blood like tiny pulsating balloons. He held the blade before him and then raised it above his head. The creature's claws dug into the ground. It grinned widely in an eerie smile, and suddenly spikes similar to a porcupine's bristles stood up along its back and through its head. The air started to smell strongly of formic aldehyde and castor oil. The damn thing was venomous too. Not good. He should have been wearing the shield and both bracers. Now he was paying the price for his own laziness. It shot out like a torpedo. Those hind legs must have had the force of a catapult. However, it leaped slightly to the side this time, extending its remaining paw to the area where Drakkainen had to be during his spinning ball evasion. In response, the man leaned backward, sword raised, still standing with his feet on the ground. He bent his knees, the claws flashed above his face, and then, with a feeling that his muscles were stretched like taut ropes, he straightened up and, exhaling in a terrifying, vibrating scream that sounded like an elongated thunderclap, he slashed diagonally and, twisting in the opposite direction, evaded the creature like a toreador. The creature landed on its hind legs and turned around. The severed limb finished its flight and hit the ground with a wet splat. They stood facing each other again. Drakkainen breathed heavily, feeling the pulsation of all his muscles. He couldn't see where he had hit. The creature opened its maw and suddenly a dark, shiny strip, resembling a narrow snake, appeared diagonally across its chest. They continued to stand there, endlessly, and then the head, along with one shoulder, began to slide away from the body and, after a long moment, it softly hit the ground. Time flowed normally again. The starlight turned from yellowish sepia to green, and the creature collapsed on its back, its legs twitching. Wanderer stood, breathing heavily. The scratches on his arm throbbed with a burning pain, but he didn't feel the effects of any poison. All his muscles were trembling, and a cramp had locked around his calf like steel pincers. The monster continued to move on the ground, but rather clumsily now. Its limbs twitched, its eyes still wild and flashing. Its maw opened and closed, occasionally ejecting some singular spike, bristling and laying the comb of spikes on its skull. Even the severed limb continued to scrape the ground with its claws. The mutilated torso rhythmically splashed streams of blood. Drakkainen couldn't recall such a creature. Most of Midgard's fauna bore some resemblance to Earth's to some extent. Convergence, adaptation to the environment. That said, animals here were something like bad dream equivalents of the Earth ones. The bears standing on their hind legs reached 3 meters. The herbivorous creature digging in the ground, which was the local equivalent of a sloth, weighed almost 2 tons, had saber-like claws and a crocodile-like snout, as if they were straight out of Earth's tertiary period. The local creator obviously hadn't abandoned their fondness for toothy, dragon-like representatives of megafauna. The monster lying here could locally pass for a common frog. Nitshisefni tapped the guard of his sword with his palm. A line of blood appeared on the ground before him. He swung the blade in a casual reishiki, turned the hilt in his hand, and sheathed the sword back. Ulf the Frog Slayer, he said quietly. He returned to the statue and examined the second skull. He found Leatherhaze. Poor guy, he won't return to his Cambridge. The existence of the creature currently twitching on the ground provided no answers. This creature was exceptionally dangerous and so fast that a person without a Sifral stood no chance against it. However, it certainly wasn't the one that finished off Halloring, turning half of his body into a granite statue. It didn't kill Zavratilova and Leatherhaze because their heads were severed using a sharp, metal, and probably rather heavy tool. The vertebrae retained traces of cutting and crushing, most likely a carpenter's axe, still stuck in a stump by the woodshed. Nearby, in a pile of chopped, now decayed logs, he found scattered human bones. They were dragged there and chopped up. In the layer of sawdust and on the very stump, traces of both their blood remained. And it was traumatic blood, full of bilirubin. Then, whoever did this, brought their heads and threw them at the feet of the statue. They also collected blood in some vessel and filled the statue's bowl with it. Someone made an offering here. But who? The statue was made locally, but it didn't originate from the coast. Among the local inhabitants, there were no followers of the pregnant dancing goddess with a sickle. She wasn't part of their pantheon. As far as he knew, the sailors' goddesses looked completely different and didn't require human sacrifices. It could potentially be Azina, the harvest lady of Amitraj, but it was over 1,000 kilometers from here, over mountains and desert. It wasn't exactly clear what this cult entailed, but it might have demanded sacrifices. However, how could there be Amitrajis here? Their country was a vast warrior empire that had conquered many lands, including several coastal kingdoms from which the sailors had originally come. They were refugees here. They would never tolerate Amitrajis. They considered them demons and despised them deeply. It was all a mystery. He had encountered nothing but questions so far, and not a single answer. The brief fight had exhausted him terribly. His muscles were starting to ache, and tomorrow he'd be walking like a paralytic, if at all. That's how it went after acceleration. A human wasn't built for such things. For a few moments, you became superhuman, and then you got sick for a day. He knew he'd collapse in a few hours in sleep. He was already feeling dizzy. His muscles had an incredible oxygen debt. He'd burned nearly all the glucose his body had, and his stomach was growling with hunger. He had probably strained his tendons as well. The small cuts pulsed with a burning pain. He might not have been poisoned through them, but they would definitely get infected. His burned back, soaked in sweat, squeezed by the chainmail and armor, also hurt like hell. He searched the entire area but found no more bodies. Zavratilova, Leatherhaze, Halloring. 5 were missing. Had they left? Had they been abducted? Had they died just as mysteriously but somewhere outside the station? He knew he wouldn't find out anything more here. He went in search of something to eat. Military rations weren't meant to last forever, but they could endure for a really long time. Unfortunately, the scholars didn't favor ready-made field rations that came in hermetically sealed pouches, looking and tasting like animal feed. But with those, you didn't need to do anything. Just open and eat, no need for heating. They had, however, taken the tastier freeze-dried rations that required adding water. He chewed one dry. It felt like eating plaster. The powder immediately bound all his saliva and turned into a salty, gluey substance that coated his throat and tongue like putty. In the bathroom tank, there was some water left, smelling of plastic and teeming with algae. He filled his mouth with it and mixed it with the dried crust of something that was supposed to be rabbit ragu with vegetables, turning it into a disgusting paste he could somehow swallow. He found a tube of strawberry jam, an energy bar, and washed it all down with condensed milk. Finally, he squeezed the anchovy paste tube directly into his mouth. In his current state, he didn't care what he ate. He felt like a starving castaway. He found 3 more unopened packages and stashed them under his breastplate. The rest was torn, crushed, their contents dissolved by the rain, devoured by animals. Not much was left anyway. He revisited the laboratory and found that there were still many items that might come in handy. Unfortunately, he could hardly take anything with him. He was already burdened like a wandering peddler. After some thought, he took the local coins at least. He dumped the earth-made jewelry into a coffee can and hid it under some stones in the foundation. He stepped outside the hut and realized that, contrary to all assumptions, he wouldn't stay here. This place wasn't suitable as a base camp. It wasn't suitable for anything. He had to move on. Where? He had no idea. He assumed that until he found the bodies, he would consider the others alive. That meant they had to leave here. But where did they go? Most likely they went forward initially. The tree in the middle of the courtyard had a peculiar trunk with a barrel-like bulge in the center, resembling a man's chest. He examined it more closely and noticed that the branches growing from it also had distinct muscle lines, shoulders, biceps, even veins on the forearms. The longer he looked, the more details he saw. Ribs, nipples, collarbones, Adam's apple. Finally, he even saw a face. Another sculpture, he said aloud. A real art gallery. And then the wooden face opened its eyes. Drakkainen jolted upright, stepping back as he drew his sword halfway. Eyes stared at him with a kind of deranged suffering. Normal eyes, with whites. Earth-human eyes. The locals had irises that covered almost the entire eyeball, like horses. The face was familiar. Duval, Joaquin Duval, the expedition leader. "What happened to you?" he asked, realizing he had spoken involuntarily in the language of the coast. He repeated the question in English. The eyes moved rapidly. "You can't speak? Blink twice for yes, once for no." 2 blinks, very quickly. Did the locals do this? 3 blinks. What does that mean? Are the others still alive? 3 blinks. Does that mean you don't know? A moment of contemplation. 2 blinks. Hundreds of questions raced through the wanderer's mind, but few required answers in yes or no. Something tapped softly. A small branch on the right limb moved slightly, striking the adjacent one. Tap, 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 tap. Pause. Tap, tap, pause. Morse code? He tried to understand what was being transmitted but got confused. Dot, dash, dot, dot, dash, dash, dot. LME? The other person started again. Dash, dot, dash, dot, dot. Finally, he understood. Kill me. Do I have to kill you? The tree stopped tapping, blinked twice, and closed their eyes. Duval, I don't want to kill you. This is a rescue expedition. I'll bring a ship here. But I need to know. Where did the others go? What happened here? Who did this to you? How can I help? Kill me, kill me, kill me, kill me, kill him, kill. This was leading to nowhere. Drakkainen pleaded, begged, reasoned, and explained, all in vain. The other didn't respond to any questions, just repeated the message endlessly. He examined the tree from all sides, but couldn't find anything except wood. Ordinary, smooth, dry wood, almost stripped of bark. Trunk, branches, narrow lanceolate leaves resembling olive leaves. A tree that contained Duval, much like the statue in the cabin, contained Halloring. However, Duval was alive. He only had eyes and the ability to move one branch. Did he grow together with this tree? No wonder he had gone mad. Overwhelmed with horror and sympathy, he might actually have been able to kill him, but he had no idea how. How to kill a tree quickly and humanely? Besides, it wasn't that simple. He walked away, trying not to listen to the stubbornly tapping branch. Kilma, 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 kilma. He approached the half of a creature lying on the ground and decided to examine it more closely. He prodded it with his sword. The creature's round, blank eyes suddenly opened wide. Its arm dug its claws into the ground, and its head shot up like a rocket to face level. The acceleration dropped like a curtain, and he felt a rush of air on his back and neck as he jumped backward, evaded with a leap, and slammed the creature's head with a powerful, swinging kick in the air. It changed direction, accelerating noticeably, and then rolled on the ground with a disgusting, hollow sound. Drakkainen stared at it in horror, breathing heavily, and then saw the arm extending forward, claws digging into the ground, followed by tense muscles pulling back the bark and head. The arm extended forward again, just like in some cheap horror movie, and it slithered toward him. "Damn it all!" Drakkainen shouted. "Just die, garbage!" He gripped the sword with both hands and pierced the creature's skull with all his strength. Then he lifted the surprisingly heavy carcass on the blade, swung it, and slammed the head straight into the palisade wall until it thudded. "I've killed you 5 times already!" he screamed in rage. "Stop living, for hell's sake! What kind of madness is this? What a messed up world! Next, Baba Yaga will fly by on her broomstick. She'll pass her cauldron and pay her respects to me." The creature seemed to have listened to him as it hissed softly and froze in place. "Well," said Drakkainen, "and stay down." He had had enough of this place. He was furious, tired, and hungry. Muttering under his breath, he paced the courtyard with long strides and entered the hut. He came out a moment later, carrying an old frayed blanket. He threw it on the ground and kicked the severed limb onto it, then wrapped it up tightly. Inside, something began to move in the rags, so Nichasefni, cursing terribly in Finnish, thudded the bundle to the ground several times. Then he gathered the remaining remains of the expedition members in the courtyard and carried them into the hut. He laid everything he found on the table in front of the statue of Halloring and stood with his head bowed, moving his lips soundlessly. He searched the hut once more and finally emerged with a small plastic container, pouring its contents over the walls and the sagging shingle roof. Then he sat down at a safe distance and took out a flint from the pouch on his belt. "You are to find out what happened," Glacier had instructed, "and if necessary, clean up the mess." Duval continued to tap the branch monotonously. Drakkainen got up, kicked the well's cover, and went to get an axe. As he descended the hill, flames were already reaching above the palisade and showering sparks into the night sky.